about this. Bit of a zombie outbreak here in Colorado. So, sorry about that. You'll probably be hearing about it pretty soon. So that's the main thing for this week, is the zombie outbreak. So good luck. Looks like water cures it. Yay! There is no zombie outbreak. It's fake news. The zombie outbreak is fake news. It's just not true that everyone is dead. Or some sort of dead person. It's just not true. It's fake news. Nobody's heard of this fake news stuff. So, what are we talking about tonight? It's going to be all puppy dogs and happy faces. Puppy dogs and happy faces. That's what's going on tonight. No, this is not a particularly happy, good news cycle. This actually, I think, catches it a little better. So, no, I can't do this. I don't like doing that for kind of the more serious news. Alright, so what are we talking about tonight? We're going to talk a little bit about the sexual assault situation here in the country. And some of the news coverage. A little bit about talking about that. Talking about it. Which I think is useful from time to time. It's called the meta conversation. And so we have kind of a fairly advanced way that we're going to be doing that around here in these parts as we move forward over the years. I'm going to see, actually, I haven't tried this experiment yet, so I wanted to see if you guys can see if I draw something, what it looks like. Oh yeah, you can see that. Alright, so we're going to have an interactive artistic presentation today. So we'll see how that goes. And we'll talk about that. The president sent out a wrong mass shooting tweet. There was another one. I missed a couple weeks. So there's been a couple of big mass shootings that we haven't really talked about more. And we certainly haven't seen any legislation or big changes yet. So hopefully that will keep simmering. I hate to say that, on the legislative bench. Talk a little bit about some Trump tweets in the NFL battle, about why he's doing all that stuff. The tax plan update, because everybody loves talking tax cuts. That's always fun. WikiLeaks and Trump Jr. was one of those topics that was a couple weeks ago. And the Judicial Slaughter going on right now. There's some stuff that changed. We'll talk about that. Rand Paul! Sorry. He's still in the news a little bit. We'll see what happens with that. The U.S. is kicking out a bunch of disaster survivors. We'll talk about that too. Net neutrality is coming up. So we'll talk about that again. That debate is really an odd one, because it's all between people who know what it means and people who have been convinced that it means something that it does not. Which sucks, because it's so important to just the basic functioning of how an internet works. And then after we do that, maybe the digital media crash, we'll see if we have some time to talk about that. But with that, and being late as heck, because, I ain't got work tomorrow. Thanksgiving time! Thanksgiving 2017. This is our show, so let's get started with the fun stuff. Everybody likes the fun stuff, don't they? Let's see. We got any good... So, I don't want to... So how do we talk about this? So, as we began our sexual assault... Just kidding. Sorry. I should play with these more often before I actually come and do this, so we can find something that's a little bit more appropriate for the seriousness of the discussions. Paddington? No. Doesn't work. And Assassin's Creed is definitely not going to happen. Alright. Boop-a-doop-boop-boop. So, we've got this election coming up in a couple weeks, and this was what really started this latest round. There's actually two things, right? A, you have the Senate race with Roy Moore in Alabama, and then B, you had the reporting on Harvey Weinstein out in California. Since then, things have exploded to a degree that I don't know that anybody could have really predicted, and it's been it's overshadowed a couple of those parts of those stories as they've gone on, but the whole thing has gotten really pretty interesting as you're seeing what some seems like a little bit of a sea change culturally as we approach this issue and deal with this topic. But one of the things that has been so tough is that when we're dealing with this, and we've got this guy Moore and this big Senate race coming up in Alabama, and it's overshadowed everything about that, which misses like just what an complete and utter douchebag this guy is, and for the Republicans, how far this is down the slope of just crap candidates. We have this history with this guy going back to the 80s before then he got married and stopped doing it after it finally worked, per se. And he found some young lady. It's just so horrible. Cops were warned about him. He was banned from a mall. There's just a massive hypocrisy covering for this after you hear about some of these stories. And then, that's not even... I don't even know... is that the worst part about this guy politically? Again, he got kicked off the Supreme Court in Alabama twice. Once, I believe, it was for the gay marriage thing, because he just does not think that gays have that right, regardless of what anybody else is going to say. So he got kicked off for that, and then also for the Ten Commandments thing, which is just a complete and utter violation of the separation of church and state. His argument there is that, well, the founders of the country only knew about Christianity, so when they were saying you got the freedom to practice religion, they were talking you got the freedom to practice Christianity. So he's right along, he's straight up in Bannon's ethno-cultural white Christian world. So we'll see with that. I don't, that whole bigotry thing. I think it looks like from the polls I've seen, it looks like he's actually losing in Alabama. But that's going to happen in a couple weeks. So we're going to see again when this kind of situation's on the ballot. Right, and how it changes. There's no question, I don't think, that there's been a big tilt to the left of the country as people have seen what's happened in the White House. If that has extended all the way to electing a Democrat in Alabama, then you're going to have a very interesting conversation. Like I've said before, you're not going to get an impeachment of the president until it becomes clear that he's a huge anchor making it impossible for people to get reelected that are part of his party. That's what killed Nixon ultimately. And it was the summer right before the election, so I wouldn't expect too much anyway. But, so in addition, moving back onto our main subject, which is that coverage of sexual assault and this question. I'm of course I'm not the expert here in any way, shape, or form. Watching this come out, but there are so many different stories that I've been reading and hearing, and that's one of the things that as we look at this, what I don't want to do and hope we don't do is create this huge whole bucket and put everybody in the same place that nobody can ever come out of. There are so many of these different stories. Now I'm looking at this list I threw up real quick. Charlie Rose, Glenn Thrush, Al Franken, Joe Barton. And by the way, Franken, there's another story that came out about him. So we'll see how many butts he did touch. Which I kind of almost joke about a little bit because it actually is in Bob's Burgers. This character likes to touch butts. Looks like Al is that character. Joe Barton, his dick pics in and out for the 70-year-old guy. John Conyers and the settlements, which we're starting to see. Hopefully we'll see all the settlements that come out of the House. There's been a not quite a cover-up, but it's difficult to see. We've got Louis C.K. and his kind of pathetic look at my dick routine. There was another one, Jeremy Piven had a couple accusations. He took a lie detector test. I was reading about that today. The guy on Transparent, he's not going to go back to his show. You got Kevin Spacey, got fired from his show. Totally. The guy, I guess John Lasseter from Pixar, who went out. Mark Halperin. There was another journalist. I mean, these are not, a lot of these are not small names, not nobodies from nowhere. This is so mainstream. I mean, it's massively huge. So I do think we need to find a better way to talk about and compare this kind of stuff. I don't know that it's easy, I guess, nowadays. Right. That's exactly kind of the thing, that difference between being a jerk and being a predator and trying to use your power to prey on someone and just being kind of pathetic about how you try and get laid. Because it's one of the things about that harassment thing that's always that part of it that, in that kind of the corporate world where you're defining exactly that kind of thing, that unwanted aspect of it, and where there's people have power and try and use that power to turn that into some sort of vague attraction. That's like what you see with the Charlie Rose, an example, and even the Glenn Thrush stuff, two different bits. Although there you have that extra, well, I was drunk, I've got a problem with drinking aspect that you'll see people throw out too in those kind of situations that blur other lines. And even the reporting on some of these, a number of them include, a number of just inappropriate, mostly, and like, I don't even say mostly, like actually like full on kind of, yeah, it was consensual, I just didn't like it. I mean, but some of these are ridiculously, no question. The Weinstein stuff. Oh, the other one that's come out, Russell Simmons, and the Ratner, I guess, was the other big director. That these are like those, textbook Hollywood predator, 18-year-old model kind of stories. I guess actually the star for Wonder Woman, which we watched with the kiddo the other day, she loved it. She's not going to be in the sequel without switching out that producer just because of that reputation and everything that's come out. So there's been so much of this, and that question of how do we kind of talk about it? How do we rank or do this? What are the levers, or what are the the axes? What are the dimensions that we're looking at to measure what's going wrong here? And I know some people don't like that conversation at all, and this entire conversation is beyond uncomfortable. And I don't think there's anybody who has to be forced to have it if they don't want to. Of course, that's kind of the whole point here. But I think as we work as a society, we've over the generations, right? We had a couple generations where we've integrated, to the most part, right, women into the workforce, and that's where all this stuff happens. I mean, there's, of course, that other aspect, I guess, where you have street harassment and catcalling and things like that, but none of those kind of stories are what is the focus here, but that's, again, part of that same kind of universe. But it does appear, and one of the things that might be kind of good that's coming out of this, is the conversations that are having. There's so much of this now that you can't deny, and no one can deny that this stuff is going on. And what that does is, again, that's the same kind of thing where you've had other oppressed and preyed upon groups, including, racial minorities with their interaction with our police, who, now that we have the ability to share these stories and see what's been going on, people believe the stories, right? And the stereotypes, where they come from. So even just having that ability to have an existence and experience validated is a step forward. And not just have to. I mean, you look back at a lot of the stuff in the 90s, and I remember a lot of this stuff in the sea change of the way that's happened. And that's where I was going to talk about this a little bit. The whole point of... sorry. One of my big... actually, my big kind of thing philosophically for what I worked on for a long time is this thing I call the model. It's a notion, a concept for being able to compare and contrast various things, basically anything. It's the model of a thought, of a notion, of an idea, and then to universalize that model and then be able to use that to compare two different and coexisting ideas or concepts and see where they overlap and where they contrast and where they agree and where they disagree. Because the mind is a many-splendored thing, and many people think and assume certain things. So having to have a situation where you can kind of draw out a picture of what you think is the idea behind the model. To draw out a picture of what you think and have a shared understanding of how that picture is drawn. And this is one of those things I was thinking about this today, and this entire idea of how do we rank and talk about this kind of stuff. And that's kind of precisely what the idea is behind using the model. This is one of the infinite things that it could be used, in a sense, to discuss and to hopefully advance the conversation. The idea behind that... See, I've tried to do this before, and it's so awkward and kind of this non-personal thing. You start generally with an idea of a line on here. Like so! No, see, this isn't going to work. I can't talk like this. So I'm going to have to figure out a way how to do this. But the idea is you set up a situation where you have a line and you have all these different actions and you compare, say, well, on this comparison, right, there is here all the way on this one edge, this we know, there's no question that this is that kind of predatory, horribly Weinstein, right? You've got the Weinstein on the line. And on the other end, you have... the Tom Hanks, I guess, right? Like this, or I don't, I hesitate to even pick anyone. You have your average woman on the other end, I don't know, on what constitutes, but that kind of action where somebody can know, you have that, and then as we move down, and it's one of those things too, as you kind of talk about this, well, you get the criticism of, oh, you're minimizing this kind of stuff, or, oh, that person's experience isn't less than the others. And that's an interesting, I think that's actually, to a certain degree, a valid point, because a lot of these are, and you have the other side, I guess, the counterpoint, that's what I'm trying to make, is that you have those kind of smaller indigressions. You have that difference between being a jerk, right, and being a predator, and that stuff between that, where the advice would be, hey, cut it out, versus, hey, I need to call the cops. And that kind of line between where we need to understand, even, I guess, how we're going to judge all this publicly. But it sounds like it's going to be pretty hardcore, which I think is probably the way to go for a while, without a doubt. But we can't do that. And that's been the weird thing about this whole conversation, and that big 400-pound shadow standing over top of the whole thing. And that's the President of the United States, who went through this and, went with the old school model, call them all liars, bring them all out, attack them all, admit nothing, even when it's obvious that you're on tape, right? So that was kind of the hope between this whole last election that it would be. So we now have this kind of weird dragging anchor at the top, and the degree to which he finally gets that is going to be interesting. So I don't know if we can even really, anybody can declare any kind of victory while that's going on, because the influence of that goes beyond a news cycle or 2 or 3 or 5. But anyway, the idea with that model isn't all to use a paper for it, but to, in fact, make an app about it so people can do and a little bit more kind of comparison and a little bit more formalized version of the idea. And then you use to kind of identify and pick words. There's a lot of words that get thrown around in these kind of conversations that make it difficult to have, and the emotional involvement when one says, well, I don't think that's quite that. Oh, well, then you're just one of those. And it's like, well, I don't think we can, go all the way to the hilt every single time. It's not how our system of justice and our concepts of justice are built in this country. I do think everybody wants to see justice. What that's going to be, we shall see. Moving on a little bit, we had a president of the United States who gave condolences to the wrong group of people suffering from a mass shooting. Because they happen so often, he actually retweeted the wrong group. This happened like a week and a half ago. This is one of those, again, during any normal time period, it would be a huge scandal. Here, it's just part of the ridiculousness that all the people who already think he's a fool see as just, that's why we think he's a fool. And those last 30% just don't ever see anything of that kind of stuff. It's just that kind of ridiculousness. I mean, he tweeted about the wrong mass shooting. Just want to put it down for the record, for history, that happened. It's just ridiculous. The same guy here is now in a tweet battle with the parent of a kid who got himself caught stealing some sunglasses while on a basketball trip in China. The whole backstory here is so ridiculous that I can't even really quite get into it, except the fact that at 3 o'clock this morning, the President of the United States felt it necessary to attack this person and trumpet his own efforts in getting 3 kids not to spend 10 years in China. 3 American basketball players who were visiting China, especially to go play basketball. So they were guests of China, and they did a stupid, dumb thing, which is what kids do, and that's when you do it, is when you're a kid. And what normally happens in this situation is they get a house arrest, which is what was going on, and then after a while they get time served, which is what happened, and then they get sent home saying don't come back, which is what happened. All of the stuff that would probably normally happen in a case where the president didn't have to feel congratulated for it would have probably happened. Anyway, because that's just, there's not a whole lot of people serving 10 years in a Chinese prison for shoplifting that were there on special visas visiting to do promotional events, which is what these kids were there doing, as special guests of the Chinese government to play basketball. But anyway, instead of having any sense of that, instead our president wants to do this whole, oh, well, I personally asked them, and I saved them so much, and you need to be so grateful. You guys better be grateful. He did that. And then they were, and they said, yeah, thank you. Well, now we're going to go home. But the one kid's dad, who is just off-the-top troll, selling stuff, I mean, he really is just, he's pretty out of control, doesn't want to say thank you. And you shouldn't, I don't know why you have to. You don't. But the president just cannot handle it. And so he's been tweeting at this guy, yelling at him, oh, it's all me, and I'm not even, being facetious with that. Oh, blah, 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 blah. It's so ridiculous. And he did that. That was today, right? And that's just kind of one of those things that it takes over the news cycle and kills it. It's taken a few minutes, and there's stories actually I didn't even write about today. Like, we found more remains for the soldier in Niger and the woman who he disrespected. So, you wonder what some of this stuff is if he just realizes that this is just bait to get people out to do it, and to signal his base that he's just not going to take it from any black man. this whole ungrateful thing, it's just smells so nasty to me. It really is just, yeah, that's the thing too about both the support for the president is very strong, but the opposition is massively huge. Again, we're going to see in Alabama how that goes. The other stuff that's the problem that the Republicans have, in addition to being a bunch of jerky assholes that nobody likes, is that their tax plan sucks. They can't pass crap. And everybody's looking at it like this thing is ridiculous. This is all not what we wanted. And some of the cuts, too, for the services are starting to hit home in some of the places that voted for this guy. And while, a lot of the wealthy people love it, they don't need it. And they're already there. So, and there's not that many of them. So I think if we start to see some more election slaughters, if Moore loses, which he by all rights should, we'll see some interesting stuff. We do have pretty much confirmation now because of WikiLeaks and Twitter and direct messages that there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the people who were working with the Russian government to expose data that was stolen from U.S. institutions. It's there. The question is when they're going to pull the trigger on this stuff, and what's going to happen with that. I can't wait to see. I think we're going to get some nice Christmas presents there, but it's so evident that something's gone on. This family's not smart. They are dirty, and they're getting torn to pieces right now. And so hopefully that's coming out. And I think that's another part of the crazy tweet stuff is just the stress of what's going on here. And a lot of his family's going to go to prison. But they might not, because one of the things that's going on while this is happening is Republicans are putting judges everywhere, left, right, and center. Back on October 11th, this is my next topic, Senator Grassley from Iowa, I think that's the first one, said he's not going to plan on changing what's called the blue slip objection. This allows a senator from a state to object to a federal judge who would be appointed in that state for whatever reason. And this is one of the things that both parties had been using to slow down judicial nominees. Once the Republicans took over the Senate and Obama was president, they just said, no, we're not going to look at anybody. Now, Grassley, a month ago, said he's not going to plan on changing it. Last week, he changed it. So now they've got scheduled hearing on people who had blocks before. So now they're going to actually stop any nominee. The Democrats will actually do a full-on filibuster, which hopefully they will do soon. But if they do that, then we'll probably hear more talk of nuclear options. The Republicans right now are stacking the federal bench across the country. Because they did so much hold-up under Obama, there was a lot of extra leftover vacancies. And because they can now do this with this cover, they're pushing as much as they can, as fast as they can. Personally, I'd like to see if turns out these guys go down as being dirty, we do a little bit of cleanup on the bench afterwards. There was one of the nominees who came out now, was like this 35-year-old guy, never been on the bench, was a blogger and worked in the Justice Department, was married to somebody in the White House. They didn't tell anybody. They still nominated him for a lifetime appointment. He's in his 30s. He's never sat on the bench before. He has declared his allegiance to the NRA, so there's that. So, I mean, there's this kind of stuff is going on, and underneath the radar of a lot of that. And that's what's kind of the long-term, again, danger of leaving this up, to where I end up doing this stuff in the basement. I'm like, psh, psh. Let's not get that far, folks. Get out there and vote and stop it soon. Speaking real quick, we're going to go Rand Paul still in the hospital, I think. I don't know. Haven't heard the real story. The guy shows up in court at the end of the month, so we'll see. It sounds like he ran down the hill and libertarianly tackled him in the back. And for some reason, he just wasn't protecting himself. I don't know why. He just didn't want to. He was relying on institutions to protect himself instead of standing there at attention with a gun. So a guy snuck up on him and tackled him and broke his ribs. I don't care. Sorry, I'm being a bit flippant. That's unfortunate for Paul, but he's kind of a dick. And they're taking away healthcare from millions of people, and now he's soaking up more federal dollars that he doesn't think anybody should get, but he's going to use them. speaking of horrible federal things, the federal government's ending protections for a number of immigrant groups who came to the U.S. after various disasters. This is one of those things that various presidents just keep extending because they don't want to be total douchebag assholes and end it. And so total douchebag asshole is ending it and deporting a lot of these groups. It's like 60,000 Haitians have to be gone by next summer. I believe there was also Hondurans, Guatemalans, basically every place that there's been a large natural disaster over the last 10, 15 years that the U.S. has said, yeah, we can take a few people, come on in, you can stay here while you guys work to get things going back. They're all getting kicked out. That's what happens when you have a white supremacist who's the president. Just in case you were wondering. When you have one who's also a Republican corporatist, you have an end to net neutrality, which is what they're voting on tomorrow. So we'll see how that's going to go. There's going to be all sorts of court cases, but they're fighting to do that. So with that, I mean, we're out. No more internets the way we think the internets work. And then it changes demonstrably and dangerously. Through the mobile web, it's already kind of that way, and we were hoping to get the net neutrality stuff kicked up to that next level, but instead we're going to kick it down the next. I'll keep you updated on how that goes. This would be a good week to call your congressman or congresswoman, as it were. My congresswoman's on the good side of the stuff and is out there fighting in a number of ways, so she's rocking and rolling. But I hope everybody can reach out to their folks this week to try and keep our internet as free as we can. Oh, good times. Digital media crash, we'll talk about that next week, I think. We're going to go ahead and call it a night because it's late, I'm tired. And we got some Thanksgiving stuff to eat. So everybody, thank you for dropping by tonight. I appreciate it. Maybe you can hear that scratching in my voice because it's starting to hurt. We've got some coughs going around the house. So hope you and yours have a happy and healthy Thanksgiving. And I'll probably see you next week. I'm going to try and do that. And we'll keep going on and keep an eye on how the world's working and what we can try and do in our own little ways to fix things. So peace out, y'all, and I love ya. Good night.